handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er. Out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds AGBT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience, heard worldwide on Mojo 50. Got the distinct pleasure of having Dr. Bruce Hartman with us. Dr. Hartman has a book titled Your Faith Has Made You Well, a radical new way to create peace and hope. Boy, we all need that one. And I'm so pleased that he's decided to spend a little bit of time with us. Because there's really, a lot to handle here. So, Dr. Hartman, thank you for being with us.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me.
Let me ask you, there's an awful lot of meanness. There's an awful lot of anger out there in the world, and do individuals know when they're in some kind of despair? Do they know when their whole life has kind of gone sideways, that they even recognize that something is not on center?
Generally, when some form of depression or exaggerated anxiety, it takes somebody else to point it out to them, because they begin to feel that what they're living with is normal when it actually isn't normal.
Well, you mentioned somebody else. Not to bring up a bad moment in time, but we just had 2 mass shootings, and something tells me that there was a lot going on in these shooters' lives. The LA Times actually did an interesting article where a study was done on these people going back to 1966. And there was despair. There was some trauma that happened, and these people just kind of live with it all. So do other family members or other friends need to help recognize that and point out that people are in some kind of sadness or anxiety, as you say?
Yes, definitely. And many times it takes, for people to break out of anxiety or despair, certainly family members, friends can help, but you have to be careful how you help. Yeah. Because, people people get to a point where they're thinking with how they're living is normal. And they lose a sense of responsibility and accountability. And for friends, and family, you can't really judge people. And that's the first thing you shouldn't do, is judge them, but just try to help them, try to get them to see where they are isn't normal. A lot of times when you're working with people in pastoral care, the worst thing you can do is tell them that they're wrong or that they're in trouble. You have to help them get to that own realization themselves.
So your book, it kind of lays out a practical a guide, some kind of arrows in their quiver, if you will, that
Right.
teaching them that there's some other things that you need to consider and possibly inject into your everyday consciousness. That's a tall order for some that never even considered any of those opportunities.
Yeah, and so there's three quivers that they have, that we all have. The first is obviously Jesus Christ, who died for our sins, but he's more than that. If we all remember that whatever God does with love. Anything that's evil is not something God did. So the first thing is orienting yourself to having a personal relationship to Jesus, and understanding that Jesus is more than just our Savior. It's a mutual friend. It's a friend that we can call upon. So that's number one. Number two, having faith in the risen Lord. And when you start having faith, you start having hope. And as your faith is answered, you build trust. So having faith, I love Martin Luther King's quote on faith. He said, it's like taking a step down when you don't know the full length of the staircase you're walking down. That's faith. Mm-hmm. And that's built through trust. And how you build trust is with prayer. And for people that don't pray, they don't get to see this relationship that they have with God through Jesus Christ. And your prayers will be answered, particularly if you pay attention and you do it with a heart that's filled with faith. So the three quivers we have, one is Jesus Christ, and God. The second is that we have is our faith, and a trusting faith and a hopeful faith. And the third, which is the most important, I think, in terms of developing a relationship with Jesus and having faith, is prayer. And I'm sure this has happened to you as well, but sometimes when we pray, we are astounded by the ingenuity and the creativity that God has with us in answering our prayer. And that's done, I believe, for a reason. It's because it becomes very personal and very intimate with us, those answers. And that's what helps build trust. So it's a long road back. I mean, you don't just pray Tuesday morning and then have your life back on Wednesday, because God's not a genie. But the other issue I mentioned earlier, which is about accountability. We've all heard the saying, God helps those who help themselves. Mm-hmm. And God is looking for us to reach out and to take responsibility for our lives and accountability for our lives. And sometimes our own anxiety is created by what we did. So as you take the first step, which is the key to the book, which is your faith has made you well, you think about the Bible stories, like the woman who has been bleeding for 12 years. And what's missed in that story is the heroic effort she put in to getting close to Jesus. In those days, a woman that was bleeding would not be allowed out in public. So she had to force her way through a crowd that was visiting Jesus and reach in and touch his cloak. And when she touched his cloak, this was all her action. She touched the cloak. Jesus looked at her and said, "Arise, daughter, your faith has made you well." And that's the purpose of the book, is to show how these three things I talked about help people get healed from either physical or anxiety or whatever their troubles are.
Dr. Hartman, what you just said made you well. It's almost like spiritually and biologically, you have the structure, the blocks within your own being that you need to be receptive. And I think some people are receptive. They just don't know that they are. They have this this attachment that they don't recognize it. And they cast it off. Is there some accuracy in that?
There's a lot of accuracy in what you just said, but here's the answer. God is a compelling God in the sense that God will continue to reach out to us and push us to being with God. And those are the red lights that we go through before we develop this relationship with God. But God never gives up on humankind.
Those that really are not active in practicing a faith, or don't think that they're spiritual at all, they kind of cast the whole thing aside. when something extraordinary happens in, everyday life, they see something that's kind of shocking. Almost the first thing they say is, "Oh my God." So it's,
Right. Yeah.
it's already there. I mean, I see these people that have dismissed any part of some kind of connectivity to a God, or there's some sense of biblical learning, and yet it's already there because they've just said, "Oh my God, well, who's God? What God? Did you realize what you just said?" so,
Right.
so there is some kind of bind there, Dr. Hartman, right?
There is. I was on an airplane. I was on an airplane once flying from New York to Europe, and we got hit by lightning. The plane got hit by lightning. And I was amazed at how many people, including the woman sitting next to me, who cried out, "Oh my God!" So that it is resident in all of us.
Yes.
And there's two things that prevent us from really accepting what God has to offer to us. The first is answering the question of what ought we to do, because many times we do what we want to do, not what we ought to do. And, when you can always answer the question creatively of what ought we to do as opposed to doing what we want to do, then you move closer to God. The second thing that troubles me, and I see this a lot in our world today, the two principles of Christianity are love your God and love your neighbor. But what I see too often is people are swayed by what they hear in the media or the newspaper, or they read or they see, and that becomes their reality, as opposed to all we're really supposed to do is love God and love our neighbor. And they take these positions in life against people or against themselves that are really harmful because they forget about those two principles. One of the things I did about 10 years ago as I was entering this journey, I stopped reading the newspaper, listening to the news. Other than anything about the Boston Red Sox, I would still.
Fair enough.
And you know what happened? In over a 1 year period, I became at peace, and I realized that it isn't what happens in the world; it's what happens with my relationship with Jesus and my prayers. And when I got all that news away from me, I started to develop a better relationship with God. And so that would be a suggestion for everybody. It's just, don't watch CNN, don't watch Fox. And I'm sure they wouldn't want me to say that, but it will help everybody out.
Well, I mean, if you do take a break, I had somebody ask me yesterday, "Where were you all weekend?" And he's in California. And so he saw that I wasn't on, social media and whatnot. And he's like, "Where were you?" And I said, well, with what was going on, I felt like, and I saw some indications of nonsense over on social media of all things political and chaos that we've got going on here. I just stepped away. I said, no, I'm not going to subject myself to this. I saw sarcasm, and I saw people, with conspiracy theories. And I was, no, I'm stepping away. So it's almost like a self-protection kind of thing, and just to be take some time to be introspective, right?
Exactly, and it's not just self-protection; it's self-development too. Walking away is a matter of strength, and it's back to this answering this question that we all have to ask ourselves: what ought we to do? When we get caught up with the lurid or the things that we can't control, and we let it affect us, then we're not doing what we ought to do, which is protect ourselves and be reflective of our relationship with God.
Dr. Hartman, I've interviewed several authors, much like you, that have, written books that are make profound cases for and guide paths to find some peace and some hope, and to kind of come back into some kind of a spiritual realm. I'm kind of struck by the volume of authors like Dr. Bruce Hartman, that almost feel like, do you feel like you need to augment what is going on in the churches or not going on in the churches?
Well, you just hit my main reason for why I write is I don't see in our churches today what I saw back in the 60s and 70s.
I don't either.
And, you know, there's a lot of things missing. I think one, ministers / priests / theologians, you know, we have the responsibility through knowledge to say what we need to say. And you should always say it lovingly. You should always say it kindly, but you should always say it. And, you know, say it creatively. And I don't think our ministers stand in the pulpit fearing God more. They fear their congregation. They fear that they'll leave. And in essence, what they do is they dilute the message. And, you know, the second thing in our church is I see children disappearing. Mm-hmm. They go to rooms. They don't stay in the congregation. Mm-hmm. And they're all people of God as well. They should be there. And it's a good way to enlist them and to invite them by having them read Bible verses. I was at a wonderful church this past Sunday, and the children during donation time each took their own dollar and brought it up and put it in the plate. And I said, isn't that wonderful that they are giving what they have, and they're doing it with the adults doing the exact same thing. So I think we need to help our children. I think our ministers have to be more committed to the Word of God and less political. And the third thing is, you know, everybody's time is really stretched these days. You have dual income families, you know, who have a lot to do on the weekends, and they don't find time to go to church. But that 1 hour you go to church, for me personally, that 1 hour is worth days.
Well, I think people cheat themselves. You know, writing books, I think, you know, people, authors just like you are saying, okay, if you're not going to go to a church on a Sunday or a Friday or, you know, whatever day, then you find yourself in a bookstore or you find yourself traveling through Amazon.com, that you found another channel to reach out because these people don't, you know, carve out that hour. So you really found another means by which to reach some of these people. Is that right?
Yes, and it's I don't do it just with books. You know, I also have a website, and one of the things that we do on our website is we produce 4 pieces a week that talk about some aspect of faith. We do one on Sunday. We call it A Year with God. And it's basically a mini sermon. And part of the reason, a large part of the reason why we do it is what you just said, that we still feel this obligation to talk with folks and help the world.
I'm pretty convinced that Dr. Hartman needs to go on a mobilizing campaign and you start subscribing people that you can send them a text message every day.
Well,
texting seems to be the vogue thing to do.
Well, what I do every day, actually, I have over 30,000 people that, for whatever reason, are interested in what I have to say. So thank God and praise God for that. But every day, I send out 5 tweets. Usually it's a daily Bible verse, so there's always a prayer. I always use a Christian quote, and then a couple of my observations that I had from the previous day. And from that, that's how we build the blogs and our Instagram and our Facebook and our LinkedIn. Again, it's getting the message out. And every week we send out messages that over 30,000 people read and see.
And so, if you've mobilized some of your like-minded theologians, we could be reaching more people than the Pope here real quickly, right?
We can, and there's a number that abound, and there's a lot of wonderful resources. One of my favorite ones is Bible Hub, which is a great website, because if you key into Google something that's bothering you that day and you want to read about an inspirational story or an inspirational verse, all you have to do is Google it into, that heading, and you'll end up at one of our sites where hopefully we help the individual.
What's the difference between peace and hope?
Peace is a state of being. It's a state of being where when you've arrived at a place where your life is fully committed to God and to your neighbor. And by the way, you don't get to pick your neighbor.
No.
When all of humankind is your neighbor and God is your source of life and wisdom and knowledge and bounty, when you're there, that's when you're at peace. And things like stock markets going down or people getting shot, it's not that you don't care about it, but you're more at peace because you know there's something you can do about it. Uh-huh. So that's what peace is. Hope precedes faith. You hope that there's an answer. And as you get your answers, you get more hope. And as you get more hope, you get more faith. And as you get more faith, you get more trust. And it's a cycle that you just build over time. And that's the value of hope. And when you don't have hope, which is where some of these people are, it's not a time to strike out. It's a time to go inward and try to recover that hope. And that's one of the things that I try to do with this book, is to show people how to do that.
Dr. Hartman, we can't tell what kind of traumas, how large or small they may be in somebody's life, but they cause anxiety, and then anxiety causes, anger and really in some cases hate. I go back to the part of the title of your book, Made You Well. You have these abilities. And those around you, if you choose to have these people, the right people around you, can help you recognize these things, and that you've got the receptors to a cure. So I think that's what I'm hearing from you. Yes. Is that right?
Yeah, you have the receptors internally, and for those of us who are with those who need hope, you can, particularly as you get tuned into this, and it's not something, again, you can say, well, today I'm going to just go help people. It's a building process. But what you look for is these receptors. And the receptors usually come in the form of aberrant behavior that are unrelated to what's going on. And, for instance, I know a woman who is about to be homeless through some really tragic decisions that she made. But when you look at what she's working on, it's not about finding a home. It's about something else, like going to a concert. Now, that's inconsistent behavior, right, and that's what we should pick up on. Particularly if you go to a funeral, you will always see aberrant behavior, and that's a sign that people are in grief. They may not be showing it, but it's a sign that they're in grief when they're not connected with what's going on around them. So I usually look for words or actions that are different than what a person should be doing to try to help.
Well, I think you've done us a big favor here. I think that you have really told the audience that there's some other signals out there that we should be looking for, and again, not to make any kind of judgments, but kind of step in and offer some pathways. The title of the book is Your Faith Has Made You Well, a radical new way to create peace and hope. We've been speaking with Dr. Bruce Hartman. You can find his book on Amazon.com. So, Dr. Hartman, thanks so much for this discussion. Really, really kind of a fun discussion, if you will, and I would say happy discussion.
Yes, and that's what our goal in life is, to find peace and hope, as you said. And blessings to you, and thank you for taking the time to hear me.
Happy to. Thank you to do. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so stay with us. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience. I've got the distinct pleasure of having Dr. Paul Nathanson with us. He is a university professor of culture and religious studies located in Canada, one of our neighbors up north. And Dr. Nathanson has written, I think, a 4-volume series titled Spreading Misandry. And so we're going to get into that little bit of discussion. But Dr. Nathanson, welcome to the Denise Simon Experience. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning. I should add that my co-author is Catherine Young.
Just going to say that. So thank you for that. And congratulations. I mean, this is clearly a topic that I think it took a lot of courage and a lot of stick-to-itiveness for both of you to write this series and do the research. I would say that you've taught me a new word because I never heard the word misandry before. So help us with this this word misandry. Tell us what this is.
Well, misandry is the sexist counterpart of misogyny. Okay, misogyny, as everyone knows, is hatred toward women or contempt toward women, and misandry is hatred or contempt toward men.
It's a new term, so I guess it's been out there a while, Dr. Nathanson, so thanks for defining that for us. And you use the term contempt. So I want to ask, do we have some kind of confusion on gender? And this confusion has now led us to contempt? Is that would be somewhat accurate or no?
Well, I wouldn't explain it in terms with confusion. I'd explain contempt or hatred, I guess they're the same thing, with ideologies that promote hatred. It's not morally neutral, is what I'm saying. It's not just confusion. It's not just ignorance. It's not just stupidity. It's deliberate. It's the mobilization of resentment.
Is this a rather recent phenomenon, Dr. Nathanson, or is this something that's been building for the last, 20, 30, 50 years?
Well, the mobilization of resentment has been going on since the dawn of human history. Mm-hmm. But I think that in specific connection with current ideology, yes, it goes back about 40 or 50 years. It's not associated with early feminism, which was basically an egalitarian movement, but something that hijacked feminism in the 1970s and 80s, which I call ideological feminism, and that's a very different thing. It's the difference between the civil rights movement under Martin Luther King and the Black Power movement and identity politics that came afterward.
So you were beginning to see a trend, is that right?
Yes, I think that what's going on, this misandry, it's just one form of identity politics. So there are many forms of identity politics. We're all familiar with the conflicts over race. Well, this is just another battlefield in the same war.
You mentioned the feminist movement. Was that somewhat of a concocted movement, or was there some truth and basis for why that movement was born?
Oh, the reason the movement had reasons. There were massive economic changes going on in the 1960s. There was the advent of the pill, which, for the first time in human history, unlinked sexual behavior with reproduction. That was a momentous change, the first time in all of human history. And that in turn entailed all sorts of other consequences. So there were reasons why the feminist movement began, but it unfortunately turned into something else other than the quest for equality. Although the quest for equality, of course, is always that's the lingua franca of our society. Everybody wants only equality. The question is, what methods do you use to get equality? And one of the ways in which feminists are now trying to gain equality is by presenting men as not only their enemy, but as the enemy of the human race in general, because every conceivable form of evil and suffering they link to men. So their method is what I have a problem with. It's not that I don't think men and women should be equal.
Well, and equal in what realms too? I mean, you can be equal in the workplace or in education. Yeah.
Yes, but equality is not identical with sameness. Men and women are very similar, much more similar than they are different. But there are differences, and we need to take account of these differences so that men and women are not just interchangeable cogs. They have distinctive qualities, and we need to use both.
And you're not arguing that the qualities ought to be attacked. Your position is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we need to accept what those qualities are, and they can vary, correct?
Yes, we need to accept and celebrate and use those distinctive qualities of both men and women. That's right. So instead of saying that anything that men have that is different from women is tantamount to evil or oppressive.
Mm-hmm. So you're using the terms evil, and you're using the term contempt and oppressive, and misandry.
Yes.
But this is now what we have here is I would say a rather fast-moving sea change in culture, in attitude.
Yes.
I mean, something that's happened in the last 30, 40, 50 years actually happened, I would say, pretty quickly. Would that be accurate?
Oh, yes, I would agree. I would certainly agree. I think certainly if you look at cultural evolutions in the past, even political revolutions, they took time to develop. The French Revolution didn't just happen one day in 1789. It took at least 100 years of cultural changes to make it happen. Now, I think that, as you know, change takes place more quickly now than it ever did in the past, partly because of the quick spread of information. Mm-hmm. Now, I would say that the changes in the past 3 or 4 years, in fact, have been astonishing. 3 or 4 years ago, nobody would have imagined that any group that claimed respectability, let alone electability, would have campaigned for the removal of due process in the courts. I mean, that's a profound change. It undermines the entire legal system. But now it's being advocated. So these are momentous times.
Indeed, they are. Let me inject the word power.
Yes.
Is there a power struggle between genders now? And I would add that we seem to be on the cusp of having more than one genders. Is this about seeking an upper level of power?
Well, I think looking back over both historical and cross-cultural evidence, I'd say that there's always been some conflict over power and the various kinds of power, because there's not just one kind of power, between men and women, and also between any other groups. So that's not new in itself. What's new, I think, is as I say, the ways in which people seek power. And I think that identity politics, I can't say that's brand new either, but it's certainly, its rise to the level of the prevailing ideology, that is probably new. Identity politics being a way of thinking in which people are not individuals, but representatives of classes or groups, whether it's by sex or race or language or religion or what have you. And also, the entire struggle between these groups is seen as a conspiracy of us against them. So this has now become the prevalent mode of discourse in the public square, and you can see it in operation any night on the news.
Indeed, we can. This is a topic that, or a discussion or an issue or a subject matter that I guess has wide consequences, hence the reason that you and Catherine wrote 4 volumes to this. Is there a 5th?
Oh, well, we have 2 volumes that are almost written, which we hope to publish. We started off, by the way, with 1 volume, and it just exploded in terms of the amount of material we had to analyze. So we have, the first volume was on popular culture, which is the volume everybody likes to talk about because it's fun, in a way. Then the second volume dealt with journalism and law, which was heavy. It's a heavy volume, 600 pages.
Yikes.
The third volume is about the history of men, which is to say of the way the male body is perceived in terms of its ability to establish a healthy identity for men. And to do that, you need to have at least one distinctive and necessary and publicly valued contribution that you can make. So to the extent that men can no longer have that, we've got big problems. And I link it directly with phenomena such as the mass shooters.
Mm-hmm. Did the result of what you and Catherine have researched and authored, has the result been different from the genesis on it? In other words, you approach these topics, and it obviously is wide ranging, with one concept, but you ended up in a different place. Is that accurate?
Yes.
How so?
Well, I think we began with the assumption that if we could just undo some of the falsehoods that are being spread about men and even some about women, that we could improve things. That we could, in fact, what we aimed at was what we call intersexual dialogue. And dialogue is not just a conversation that, it's not just ranting at each other. It's a kind of conversation that we use the model of interreligious dialogue. In other words, it's about how people from classes or groups in conflict can come together in a helpful way by emphasizing empathy rather than competition or rivalry. Now, we are a long, long way from that. And I think that the last 3 or 4 years I have found most shocking, because I thought we were making slight progress, and now we're back to square zero.
Dr. Nathanson, I'm going to interject two other words, and that would be respect and grace. And I think that the position of a male and female gender with power has a component where grace and respect have been lost.
Yes, that's an interesting idea. That word grace in particular is interesting because it has theological roots. Grace meaning the result of divine love. Now, we've moved a long way from that for many reasons, partly because so many people are secular, but also because I think that grace implies somehow that there's an underlying need for both groups, because that's the way the world is constituted by divine grace. So respect for opponents, that seems to have gone out the window. I mean, yes. I hear people on CNN talking about racism as this name-calling and mudslinging, and it goes on both sides. You know, now that is what we now have instead of political discourse. We have mudslinging.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing that we don't have, I mean, you said that we were making some progress, and then it kind of got, stood on its head.
Yes, because what happened was that over the past maybe 20 or 30 years, much of the virulence of ideological feminism was confined to college campuses. Mm-hmm. And people could always say, well, that's a bunch of, student loonies, and they're, when they grow up and graduate, everything will improve. But in fact, the opposite has happened. That what used to be prevalent on campus alone has now gone mainstream. Mm-hmm. That's the difference.
Is this all under the mantra of diversity?
Well, I think it's there is a pervasive misunderstanding of what diversity is. Diversity, as it's taken generally now, means people who look different from each other. But I think that there's a much more important kind of diversity, and that is diverse ways of thinking that is seldom, if ever, taken into account, certainly not on university campuses, which insist on ideological conformity, not actual critical thinking. But it's pervasive everywhere. I mean, if you ask about diversity, it really means, counting up the number of women, the number of black people, the number of white people. But that's not really diversity. Diversity, what makes diversity a good thing, and not something that just fragments the population, is different ways of thinking that contribute to the larger whole. Okay, mm-hmm. So if we're all one country or one society with many different ways of thinking, that's a good thing. But if we are not even a society, but a collection of autonomous groups that are competing with each other, I don't think that's a good thing at all.
Yeah, there has to be some kind of a complement. I mean, I would think that scientifically, one gender complements the other on a constant basis. So as a whole, it's good for the world. It's good for society. Is that overstating it?
No, it's not overstating it. It's just that the whole idea of science is under attack. I mean, the trans movement basically says, to hell with science. We don't care if everybody has either a male chromosome or a female chromosome. If somebody wakes up one morning and says, well, I belong to the opposite sex, or to no sex at all, or to both, then that's okay. And I mean, that undermines the whole basis of science. We no longer look to science for definitions, we look to ideologies.
Is there going to be a good outcome to this, Dr. Nathanson?
Well, by the way, I should just add to that the trans movement did not begin the attack on science. That began 30 years ago under the name of postmodernism. But anyway, for your question, listen, I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm.
But you're smarter than the rest of us. You did the work.
I'm 72 years old, and I don't think that I will live to see the day when there is some real progress. Maybe I'm just too pessimistic, but I don't see it happening in my lifetime. Let's put it that way.
Well, I appreciate the honesty. I mean, you've done the work, and you've got all the signs and indicators and the research. So I'm almost inclined to agree with you, but I'm hoping as fast as this whole thing happened, it could unhappen.
Well, in the meantime, though, we've got mass shootings. We've got a male suicide rate that is 3 or 4 times higher than the female rate. We've got a male dropout rate from school that is 3 or 4 times higher. These are major problems, and pretending that they don't exist, as California's Governor Newsom declared, well, all of these problems all because of toxic masculinity, as if an alpha male like him has any lack of toxic masculinity. But, I mean, the whole notion of toxic masculinity, that there's something inherently wrong with masculinity, that it cannot contribute to the common good, which it has throughout history. These are such major problems that it's hard to, I don't know how we can get beyond it. Dialogue, in any case, Catherine and I went to University of Toronto about 2 years ago to give a talk on intersexual dialogue, and we were mobbed. The idea of intersexual dialogue was seen as so threatening and so politically incorrect, even dialogue, that they tried to get us out of there. They had to call the police, and there were fire alarms and what have you. So that's how far we are.
Well, it takes courage. One, it took an awful lot of dedication and stick-to-itiveness on behalf of you and Catherine. But then to give lectures on it takes even more courage, because now you're face-to-face with those that are certainly, I guess, groomed to be in opposition. And so I would say that congratulations for certainly staying on. Are you still doing lectures?
I haven't. Well, I mean, if anybody asks me, I'll do it. I haven't been asked for a while. I just retired. But I would do it if I were asked. But I no longer really care as much, because I don't have to worry about being fired.
Right.
What are they going to do to me? But certainly for young people, it's a tough world out there.
Well, Dr. Nathanson, I mean, not every person is supposed to be the same. And, we have a situation where on the male side, not every man's supposed to be a Paul Bunyan. We have different aspects to DNA, not meaning necessarily the chromosomes, but thought and attitudes and upbringing and education. So all of these different skills and characteristics are really what is part of the complement of gender to society, and gender get-alongness. Is that right?
Yes, I think you could put it that way, yeah.
I invented a new word. You taught me one, and get-alongness is a new one.
That's okay. There are so many new words popping up.
So you started off, you and Catherine started off on this series in one place, and you ended up in a very different one. And the outlook in the near term isn't going to be terribly positive. And is that because education and it is vogue to, I guess, attack the male gender, and so as long as it's in vogue and it's not put back in its right place, that we're going to have to live with this for a while?
I would think so. But look, history is full of surprises. And sometimes societies bounce back from low points, and other times they disappear. So I don't know, but all I know is that I want to encourage people to acknowledge this as a problem. It's a problem that coexists with misogyny, and but we need to acknowledge it and try and do something about it.
And I think it actually starts with education, and not only education from the adolescent side, but almost on the adult side.
Yes, you're right. I mean, unfortunately, and I tremble to say this, but I mean, my outlook on the university today, and I've spent most of my life in the academic world, and I would say that it's become intellectually bankrupt.
Mm.
It is so beholden to politicized ways of control, identity politics, postmodernism. There has many names, but they all amount to the same thing, which is something other than objective research.
And the consequences.
The whole idea of objective research would be ridiculed, as well. Who can be who's objective? We all have our own prejudices.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, that's true, but trite, because even though we all have our own prejudices, the whole point of living is surely to try to overcome things like that. I mean, we don't have a perfect democracy, but does that mean we should throw out democracy? It means we have to try harder.
Wise words, and I'm so appreciative of having this discussion with you. Because where we are in the basis of your series, yours and Catherine's, ends up being part of policy. It ends up being in media, and then it ends up in rule changes, regulations, and in law. So the consequences are really widespread. Is that accurate?
Exactly. The most consequential of all, of course, being law.
Mm-hmm. Scary times indeed, for sure, especially when it comes to law. And I guess not just law, but I mean how law enforcement is forced to even interact with, I guess, the protests or the people's individual rights. I mean, I don't think I think you're going to end up having to write several more volumes. Now, you can find, ladies and gentlemen, Spreading Misandry on Amazon. A big congratulations to Dr. Paul Nathanson.
By the way, Spreading Misandry is only the first volume. The other volumes are called Legalizing Misandry and, what's the other one? There's Sanctifying Misandry, which is about religion. And there's, I cannot think of the other. I can never think of the fourth one. But anyway, they're looking at the same topic, but from different points of view in terms of disciplines, whether it's history and anthropology in one volume or legal thought in another, popular culture in a third.
Dr. Nathanson, thank you for being with us. Fascinating topic, and I think that you've done us all a service for those that need to get into this. So thank you for this, and thank you for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so stay with us.
You can't handle the truth!
Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. See ya. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. See ya out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
To suppress Mike Charlie 435 921. Grid to Mark. Mike Charlie 7-tree-9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEPT, gas TOT 53.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us on the Denise Simon Experience. You know, we continue to have this Me Too movement. And, you know, in some cases, there's an awful lot of valid arguments on the Me Too side. There's certainly some truth to it when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein and Harvey Weinstein and, you know, some of the rest. But there's a flip side to all of this, and that is men who are erroneously charged and alleged, and they don't really get a voice. We've heard of some of the cases, but they're only there as a short example, and then they kind of fade away again. So Everett Bartlett has been kind enough to join us. Everett is the president of the Coalition to End Domestic Violence. Oh, gosh, Everett. Indeed so. Thanks for joining us on the Denise Simon Experience.
Well, great to be with you, Denise.
You know, there's such anger, and I can't help but think that I don't know where some of this is really coming from. We have these results of anger. We have it in domestic violence, and we have it in shootings, and we have it in, you know, legal cases, you know, alleged and charges and all these other kinds of things. So we're not really, I think, addressing the whole anger thing. And I don't know, that could be a whole show for another day. But when it comes to domestic violence, or when it comes to college campuses, I think in some cases, men are wrongfully charged. In fact, we've seen some of that. Help me with this, Everett. How common is that?
Well, Denise, it's amazingly common. So we actually did a survey on this a few years ago. This was just a random telephone survey to people across the country, and we asked a pretty straightforward question. Do you know of anybody who's been falsely accused? And that was the setup question. And then the real question was, have you ever been falsely accused of domestic violence, sexual assault, or child abuse? And you may not have heard this before, but one out of 10 people said yes. They themselves had been falsely accused of domestic violence, sexual assault, or child abuse. And just think about that. I mean, that means, you know, your friends, your neighbors, your relatives, they've been caught up in these false allegations, and the effects are just devastating.
So if I'm standing in line at the bank on a Saturday morning, and there are 2 lines, and there are about 15 people there, one of them has been falsely accused, correct?
That's correct. And I know some of these individuals personally, and some of them go through a horrible legal process. Some of them don't go through a legal process, but they are affected, very deeply affected internally in terms of their own, you know, their own well-being, their own sense of self-regard. This has happened. About 3/4 of these false allegations happen to men, 1/4 affecting women. Again, I know a good number of these people, male and female, and it's taken them years to get over the experience.
Everett, I would say that as soon as an allegation is made, without knowing all the details, the allegation is almost always either one, immediately believed, or 2, shame on you for not believing. Is that about right?
Yeah, we definitely saw this during the Kavanaugh hearings a year ago, where it wasn't just a presumption of guilt. It was like, if you didn't believe that he had been a horrible, you know, rapist, then obviously you were the scum of the scum. And, you know, you had feminists marching around with T-shirts that said "Believe survivors" and "Believe the victim." I mean, we used to believe in due process. We used to believe in the presumption of innocence, but that didn't happen with the Brett Kavanaugh hearings.
There isn't a moment in Washington, D.C. that hasn't made me angrier than the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. I interviewed Malling Hemingway and Carrie Severino, the author of the book Justice on Trial, just a remarkable book about the Kavanaugh hearings, and the coordination, the mobilization, and the choreography of all of that, for it to all turn out to be false. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It was just false. And right. we have seen this on college campuses. You know, the deans of the schools, they don't know what to do, so they kind of kill an ant with a sledgehammer, and the male student is always at fault, and he is, you know, tarred and feathered, really, for life, correct?
Well, that's right. And let me tell you about something that happened just last week. This was in San Francisco, and this was at the annual conference of the American Bar Association. And one of the resolutions proposed this concept called affirmative consent. And if you haven't heard of affirmative consent, you really need to know what it means, because it's basically the government regulating and monitoring the most intimate details of your personal life. And this is what the resolution said. This was, again, considered last week by the Bar Association. Resolved that the American Bar Association urges legislatures and courts to define consent as giving consent to engage in a specific act of sexual penetration, oral sex, or sexual contact. What that means is, translating from the legalese to the common everyday English, that means before you give a goodnight kiss to your wife, before you engage in an intimate caress, every step along the way, there must be some sort of expression of consent. Now, if that's not government overreach, I don't know what is. Yeah, I know.
I had this conversation with a couple of male friends not too long ago, and I said, look, you guys are under attack. As good as you guys are, you're under attack. And, I have two sons, and I've often said to them, don't even shake hands. Get permission and get it on video, get it on audio.
Right. Well, obviously, this is affirmative consent is a totally unworkable standard, because, I've actually, sort of half jokingly, but half seriously, I've invited people, okay, try this out in your own personal life for the next week and get back to me. Well, I'll just say to you that 0 out of about 50 people I've invited to do that, 0 of them have gotten back to me and said, oh yeah, that was I'm really glad I did that. So they're trying to create this totally unworkable standard that ultimately falls to even though women are often initiators of sexual contact, let's be honest, but, despite that, in the real world, it's usually the guy who will be held up, and sort of hung out there to dry.
As a predator, right.
Because he doesn't have a videotape. And really, is that where we want our society to go?
Well, let's go back to the American Bar Association. How would how would that work, Everett? I mean,
well,
do we turn on Alexa all day long and say, Alexa, check this out?
Well, that's the $64,000 question that nobody's been ever able to answer, because it is totally unworkable to this idea that you would give approval for every step of the sexual process. And some people actually go beyond that. They say it has to be enthusiastic approval. Okay, I have no clue what that means, but they really say it has to be enthusiastic. But again, it speaks to how liberals love to come up with, wonderful sounding, dreamy, utopian ideas that have no connection to real world reality.
The American Bar Association are lawyers, so this is kind of a thing among their own peers. I don't even know how a lawyer could prosecute or defend either side of a case.
Well, again, you are absolutely right, because let's think of this from the prosecutor's perspective. To prosecute that case, the only way you could do it is if you have a videotape of the entire experience, right? It just boggles the mind, but that's really what these people were talking about. So fortunately, they did vote against it, but still there were about 40% of these eminent lawyers who said, "Oh yeah, affirmative consent, great idea."
Why do they even get to vote? I mean, why? I mean, why was this even a topic of discussion that went that far?
Well, I think it speaks to the fact that the American Bar Association has become quite a bit more liberal than most people want to admit. When a person becomes an attorney in this country, they have to take an oath, and that oath says that they swear to protect the Constitution, and the Constitution includes due process. So, it's sort of a example of how so many institutions in our society have gone over to the dark side and have forgotten, the meaning of the Constitution, forgotten fundamental verities of what makes our society a good society.
Everett, I'm frustrated here because I think that what the American Bar Association resolved hasn't hit media. Why not? I mean, why is it you and Denise talking about this, and that seemed to be the limit of the discussion?
There were about 12 editorials that came out on this, but still, this is sort of a niche issue. You're right. Unless you are on a college campus. And I don't know exact percentages, but I think it's fair to say the majority of college campuses right now have an affirmative consent standard. And this is pretty serious if you are brought up in front of these kangaroo courts and the accusation is non-consensual sexual contact, which means you didn't get the enthusiastic affirmative consent every step along the way. These being kicked out of your college and having your transcript marked as a sexual offender, that has lifelong consequences.
People have sexual encounters every day, somewhere, sometimes many times a day. So, I mean, this can affect everybody. And so this ought to be part of a national conversation that we have this affirmative consent. And yet it's the reciprocal of that. Did the American Bar Association on this resolution even have a discussion or resolution on the flip side of it? That we have no business being in people's private lives?
Well, they don't, but they certainly should. But let's broaden our conversation a little bit, Denise, because there's more going on in our society but it's along exactly the same lines where groups are trying to turn every American into either a victim or a perpetrator of a heinous crime. Mm-hmm. So we've been talking about sexual assault, but it goes beyond sexual assault. So let's talk about domestic violence. You may be aware that there's a federal law called the Violence Against Women Act, and this comes up for reauthorization every 5 years. And guess what? We are right now at that 5-year mark, and the House of Representatives on April 4th passed its version of the Violence Against Women Act. And I hope you are seated and have your seatbelt buckled, because what I'm going to tell you is going to blow your mind. This bill that came out of the House of Representatives in April dramatically expands the definition of domestic violence. It would now include verbal abuse, social abuse, technological abuse, and financial abuse. Some of those terms are not even defined in the bill. So, but, emotional abuse, well, have you ever been, the target of the silence treatment? You don't have to answer that, but if you have been, you were a victim of domestic violence according to this bill that was passed in the House of Representatives. Have you ever told your partner or spouse to stop overspending, the credit card account? Well, if so, that's financial abuse. Have you ever received a text message that was, had a mean tone to it? Again, that's technological abuse. So basically, if this bill were to pass the Senate, it would turn every American either into a victim or a perpetrator of domestic violence. That's pretty big stuff.
Who authored that bill?
Okay. Well, so the House of Representatives is controlled by Democrats. And so the sponsor of this bill was Representative Karen Bass of California. She was the lead sponsor of H.R. 1585, for anybody who wants to look it up.
And so it passed the House, and it's sitting, in suspension over in the Senate side?
That's correct. Basically, every Democrat voted in favor of this crazy bill, and almost every Republican voted against this zany bill. So in the Senate, of course, is controlled by the Republicans. And I have to say that many of these Republicans are aware of the crazy agendas going on in our country, especially after the Brett Kavanaugh hearings a year ago. So to their credit, the Republican senators are now writing their own version of the Violence Against Women Act. And we have every hope that this will be something that makes common sense.
I guess the long and short of all of this, Everett, is that what's going to happen is the relationships that people have with an innocent hug to their neighbor, hi, haven't seen you in a while, or you've come to somebody's, birthday party and, thank you for coming, and, you give somebody a kiss on the cheek, any kind of, I don't want to say affection, but, a gesture of kindness is going to be verboten. That's really about where we are.
Well, Denise, I don't think you're exaggerating one bit, and I'll share with you a personal experience. I ride a bike, and a couple months ago I was riding my bicycle, and a woman probably in her 50s had fallen from her bicycle, and so I came along probably several minutes later. She was still lying on the ground, sort of still, her legs dangling from the sides of the bicycle, and surrounding her were 4 or 5 men in their 20s and 30s, but they were not doing anything to offer her to assist her to get back up. So I arrived on the scene, and I thought, well, here I am. I'm going to help her. I offered to help her get up. She accepted my offer, and she was up. But I saw that with my own eyes.
I'm reminded of the word chivalry. So what you exercise was chivalry, and thank you for that. But it's gotten to the point where it's going to be unlawful to practice chivalry.
Well, there's just a lot of crazy things happening in our society right now. Fortunately, we have people who are now realizing the agendas that are very much at work here. These agendas are trying to turn everybody into victims or perpetrators. They're trying to eliminate due process. They're trying to eliminate the presumption of innocence. In other words, you cannot have a functioning democracy like the United States if you eliminate due process and all of these other things.
Even when there is a casual beginnings of a meet and greet. Hi, Everett, I'd like for you to meet Denise, and I would stick out my hand.
Right.
Or in a business environment, we have, we're inviting these people in for a conference, and you walk around the room and you shake hands. We're in a very scary time. Can we go back, Everett? I mean, based on affirmative consent and any kind of tone or expression or text message or social media post, can any of this? I mean, can sanity prevail?
Well, I'm the eternal optimist, Denise, and
Thank you.
I believe very much yes, because I think societies go through crazy times, and we are certainly in a crazy time right now. And people like you and me and your listeners need to be very vocal about this and not be reticent or shy. These are scary, really scary proposals, and we need to call them out as, un-American and having nothing to do with what our society is based on.
Mammals are social creatures, period. I mean, that is, you can't unwind that. I mean, science has proven that, dogs travel in packs, elephants, human beings. We are social creatures. Without some kind of relationship or friendship or some kind of handshake or wink and nod or innocent hug, they are part of our makeup. And what I'm hearing is this very fundamental human characteristic or animal characteristic is under full-blown assault.
And so you can call it the atomization of social relationships. And so when you atomize social relationships, you're also weakening or breaking up families. When you break up families, you're going to have to grow the government because you don't have parents to socialize kids how to be respectful and follow the law. And so that's getting us back to the Violence Against Women Act that in so many ways is weakening the family and is growing the government. And, I don't know if you've been following the Joe Biden stuff lately. Let's never forget Joe Biden was the champion of the Violence Against Women Act when it was first passed in 1994. Why doesn't Mr. Biden want to talk about the Violence Against Women Act anymore? Well, because now so many people are realizing the great harm it has done.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking with Everett Bartlett, who is the president of the Coalition to End Domestic Violence. Fascinating condition, fascinating topic that we're in here, Everett. I guess we have to be on alert. We have to we have to censor our emotions here. We have to just hold our hands up and just go, hi, and yeah, nice to meet you, and no shake hands, and no discussions with people unless Alexa approves. And I'm really can't even believe that the American Bar Association decided to have this resolution. But thanks for being with us. It's certainly a topic that I know that my listeners are going to go, what? That they speak the truth because that's where we are. But it'll provoke some additional discussions at the home level. So, Mr. Everett Bartlett, thank you for having this discussion with the Denise Simon Experience. It was very much of a pleasure to have you. Ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way on the Denise Simon Experience, so stay with us. And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience, heard worldwide on Mojo 50. It was just a few days ago that on Mark Levin's Life, Liberty in Levin, he hosted Jaco Booyens, and the topic was sex trafficking, which is a global crisis. And I was just so pleased that somebody is finally talking about it. So what did I do? I reached out to Jaco, and he has been very gracious and very kind to accept the invitation to be with us on the Denise Simon Experience. Jaco is a native of South Africa, but ding, 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 he is now, in fact, a U.S. citizen. He has produced a movie titled 8 Days. And Jaco, welcome to the Denise Simon Experience. And I'm just so grateful that you decided to take this topic, this scandal, this disgusting situation, and bring some real attention to it. But welcome to the Denise Simon Experience.
Thank you, Denise, and to the listeners for having me on and being willing to, you're like a warrior princess, because you're tackling something very heavy, and there's many men that have cowered before this thing. So I've got great respect for you, and thank you for giving us a voice.
Well, I did have about two years ago, a family in Maine had actually reached out to me. Why me? I don't know. I do have a few contacts, but I ended up saving not only their daughter, but 6 other girls that had made their way under false pretenses to Alabama, and we found them in a hotel. So we were able to. Yeah, it's just awful. Now, Jaco, a lot of people don't know this, but in 2018, the Trump administration actually mobilized a task force, and it's a sex trafficking and labor trafficking task force. And so in June of this year, a year after the task force was launched, Mike Pompeo, our Secretary of State, issued a rather chilling report. And it is, in fact, about the issues of sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And it certainly lists, countries like, China and Cuba and Iran and Syria and Venezuela and so forth. And that's okay. I mean, I'm glad that, that is bringing some highlight to it. But I would argue that Houston and Atlanta are probably the 2 top cities in the United States for sex trafficking. Is that about right, Jaco?
Yeah, and look, we'll look at these reports. Mike's doing a great job, but, they dance around the issue to a degree, right? And President Trump definitely has launched a task force that has had nationwide multi-state sweeps. But you can imagine this is a daily thing, and it needs to be attacked daily. No single task force, even under the directive of the President of the United States, has enough manpower to cover 50 states and all the cities in between and what this thing really looks like. So, yes, Houston and Atlanta. Atlanta has historically been a top 10 city in the world, and it's been number 1 on many occasions. Houston is in the top 5 in the world. Now we're looking at, New York at the moment, and Los Angeles, New York, and in California, really leading the charge in regards to children being trafficked at the moment. And there's reason for that. So between Atlanta, Houston, New York, and in cities in California, those are the leaders for sure, for reason, and we can discuss those reasons. But I don't want the listener to think that it only happens in those cities. It is in Omaha, Nebraska, in Maine, in Portland, Oregon, in Dallas, Texas. I mean, it is in every zip code, in every neighborhood. And I know that sounds radical. I'm not here to, like I said on the Levin show, I'm not here to scare people, but I am definitely tired of the truth being hidden to some critical issues in our country that we need to talk about.
Indeed so. And it is a topic that nobody wants to discuss. I subscribe to FBI emails, and Jaco, some days I get 20, some days I get 50 emails of cases that the FBI has either worked on or solved or turned over. And Jaco, half of them are child pornography and sex trafficking. So that tells you that the FBI, the statistics are there to support everything that you are professing, and rightly so. And it doesn't matter what state, it doesn't matter what area, and the the FBI has to interview these people. They have to go undercover, and it's a horrible job. But it has.
Look, the FBI. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, Denise, but the FBI. It's also it's reactionary, right? Because the FBI, as strong as they are not the closest to the crime. It's the nonprofit organizations, the NGOs, the non-government organizations that fight this daily, that really are in the mud, feeding the FBI intel in order for the FBI to then do their work. So when you really start getting into the underbelly of this thing, as bad as it is at FBI level, I want to assure you, on the ground, in the streets, it is exponentially worse, because we know only 1% of the crime is reported. So of all the emails you see, and if you read statistics like there's 76,000 kids in Texas that are in danger in trafficking, these are low numbers according to what's actually going on, because it's a very hard crime to detect, number one, and a very hard crime to fight. Because what do you do when a dad is trafficking his own children from home, and they go to school, and there's dysfunction for sure, but the school counselor don't know. Is it depression? Is the kid just withdrawn? Meanwhile, they're being sold for sex. It's such a hard crime to fight. And then at the same time, you have runaways and the foster care system and the issues with CPS, child protection services. And so it's a very comprehensive crime, because there's so much money being made in it. And it is a crime. This is not a popular statement, but it's a crime that's protected.
And often goes unreported completely, because people don't, one, either recognize it, or two, the victims themselves feel such shame that they'll never say a word to anybody, right?
Correct. Yeah, and look, if it's a child that's actively being trafficked, you have to understand the psychosis in that environment with that child is survive. They are under threat. Their lives are being threatened. Their families' lives are being threatened. They're being coerced. Most of them are being drugged or being kept suppressed with alcohol. Those that are kidnapped, their identification is taken from them. They don't have access to phones. But most importantly, I'll give you an example. These pimps will do the following. They will arrange online for a buyer to meet a child in a motel. This buyer will come force sex on this child, and minutes after that act is complete, the pimp will go to the child and tell the child, "You're filthy. I can't believe you had sex with that guy. Do you know who he is? He's a gangbanger from the community. I thought you at least would have some standards." And now you're messing with the child's head, telling the child, "You're doing this. I can't. You should have said no to that guy." And the child's like, "Well, every time I say no, you hit me." And so this massive abuse going on, emotional abuse. The physical abuse is one thing, but the emotional abuse, like I said on Mark's show, it breaks people. Mm-hmm. It'll break the strongest adult, never mind a 12-year-old child, right?
Let's talk about your movie here for a second. Jaco, the title is 8 Days. Tell us what the motivation was to begin this movie and to produce it and then release it.
For those that don't know and those that do know, my sister was trafficked. My sister is a child traffic victim, a survivor today, and she's an abolitionist in Nashville, Tennessee. Thankfully, a success story, but it was a long journey. So by default, my family was involved already. I immigrated to the United States. Yes, I did legally become a U.S. citizen, very proud. I've been in the U.S. now way past 15 years. But I started recognizing the trend in the U.S. and saying, children are being trafficked in the United States, and nobody wanted to listen. Nobody wanted to call it trafficking. They called it prostitution. My wife is a writer, and she was writing a book on trafficking in the current state of trafficking in the U.S. at that time. And then we decided, you know, we own a production company, said, listen, we got to make a feature film, not a documentary, not something that kids are not going to watch. We have to depict what's really going on, take these real stories that we've been involved with, real rescues, both successfully and unsuccessfully, and show it in a film. So the story of Amber, we had to change the name and the location, of course. The story of Amber in the movie is a story where she's trafficked for 8 days, and we show what happens behind the curtain, what happens in the motel room, how are these kids treated. You hear Amber's thoughts, so you really see the traffic experience from her perspective, from the victim's perspective. And yes, she is rescued, and the real girl was rescued, which is an anomaly. It doesn't happen normally so quickly. But it did, but it still shows the tremendous amount of abuse. 52 men that had been with her over an 8-day period that forced themselves on her, and then the emotional and the psychological, you know, destruction that comes with it. So the film it's a gut punch, right? And it's a PG-13 movie. We'll never exploit or further, you know, expose the actors or the issue. But it doesn't hold back on punches and showing you really what it is, what goes on behind it. And you can really get a view into who is the buyer, how does it happen. In her case, it was through a friend luring her to a party, which is happening probably tonight across America. And Friday night and Saturday nights on every college campus. And so luring her to a party, spiking a drink, and off she went. But it's not always kidnapping. You know, it used to be kidnapping. Today, you know, it's not necessarily kidnapping. It's happening in broad daylight. It's coercion. It's at home. So the profile mechanisms are so open now. You know, every online social platform. They don't have to physically interact with the child to profile them anymore. They can now build a profile online and then approach what they feel to be a soft target.
Where can we see this film, Jaco?
Amazon at the moment. It used to be on Netflix. It got pulled from Netflix. We'll leave that conversation for another day. We think it would put back on there, but some people just don't want to show. They don't want to show darkness. But on Amazon Prime, on Tubi, and then of course they can buy it from us direct from our website.
And your website is
sharetogethernow.org. Or they can just put in the film's title, 8daysfilm.org.
How long did it take to put this movie together?
When we felt, I was driving in Dallas, Texas, and I pulled off the side of the road, called my wife, and I said, we got to do this film now, immediately. We were busy producing a different film, and from the moment we said we're going to produce it until we were on set was 35 days. We shot it in 12 days, which is unheard of. Absolutely. The crew and the cast worked 16-hour days. It was an unbelievable project. And we actually had a live rescue on the film set, which just drove the message home. So day 3 of filming, day 2 we were filming in a hospital. Day 3 we're supposed to film in a motel. The motel owner called me and said, look, I'm not comfortable with you guys shooting a movie about sex trafficking at my motel. It's not good publicity for me. And I said, look, we're not going to show the motel's name. It's just we need the rooms. He said no. So we had to scramble 7 p.m. to find a new motel. We moved to a new motel the next day. So we're at a location that was not planned. We're there for a day and a half to prepare, and we shoot this rescue scene. And as we're about to shoot the scene, 2 a.m. in the morning, we've got real Homeland Security operatives in the film, not actors. They're lined up on the door. In the film, it's room 117. They get a call while on film set that a girl they've been looking for 9 months is at this particular motel at room 113, 2 doors down from where we were shooting a movie. They moved over real time, 2 doors down, lined up on the door, blew the door open, and rescued a 16-year-old from a motel room on a live film set in front of 200 crew members and onlookers and public. And so I'm saying that God intervening, moving us from one motel to another to save a child. We weren't supposed to be there. We weren't supposed to shoot at that. It was a radical experience. It rocked the cast and the crew. We're not just making a movie about something that's happening somewhere. Literally, it was thrusted upon us even on the film set.
It had to be an emotional, moment for so many. But then again, quite frustrating. Where's the owner or the crew or the employees of the motel? I mean, there's all kinds of signals for this too, and they're not making proactive phone calls, are they?
No, there's now been multiple arrests at that motel. The motel was under investigation that year because they aid and abet for sure, because they know, because all you need to do is you look at surveillance, and I always tell public, when there's a lot of activity at a house that doesn't seem normal, cars keep coming and going, and it's normally men showing up. That's not normal behavior. Or at a massage parlor, right? Now the crime is moving towards areas, because these pimps are very clever. Look, they're evil, but they're clever. Now the crime is moving towards areas where traffic looks normal, such as strip clubs. Those strip clubs get a lot of traffic, and it's normally men. So now they're hiding sex trafficking in plain sight in strip clubs. And if there are listeners today and you do frequently or infrequently visit a strip club, socially, whatever, I want you to understand that you are part of the problem by creating demand. You're creating a demand for children to be trafficked in these back rooms. We're investigating multiple clubs at the moment in New York City that in the front of the club, like the mob used to run business. They used to run a laundromat, and in the back they were cutting cocaine, right? And so here, strip clubs, it looks like a strip club in the front, but it is a brothel for children in the back. And so this is what's going on. But again, it's not always in strip clubs or in the seedy part of town, the red light district. It is in broad daylight in the neighborhood, and these kids are recruited in school, in the malls, and online.
We had a kind of a scandal here a couple of months ago in South Florida with a massage physical therapy location, of which there are many, in a shopping center in South Florida. And one of the people caught up in this dragnet, if you will, was the owner of the New England Patriots, Robert Kraft. And as it turns out, which is a piece part that's not being, I would guess, advertised or published, is the fact that most of these employees at this particular location were, I would say, undocumented Chinese women who were essentially hostage there, and they were going way beyond just your fundamental massages. And because of wealth, I would say that it's that part of the story, of which there are many, just like this one, is gone away. How disturbing is that, Jaco?
Yeah, and you're talking about Jupiter, and look, it's a blot on that community and society. But again, I'm not here. If it's evil, I'm going to call it out. No matter what side of the aisle it's on politically, or whether it's in the clergy or wherever. So the Jupiter case, many members of our group was involved in that sting operation in the build-up. It's a 6-month operation, and what people need to understand is that operation was started because of the alleged and suspected trafficking of children, minors, through that organization. Mm-hmm. Now, nobody knew a Robert Kraft was going to walk in there multiple times over a 6-month period, along with many other well-known people that were not listed. And as you know, many of the well-known people that were listed, they walked. And this is the biggest frustration at the moment. The pimps get arrested. The bottom girls because there's a layer between the pimp and the actual victim. The bottom girls also victims, but they are handlers. Most of these arrests are the bottom girls, and they have extensive rap sheets. They are easy to arrest from that perspective because no one's fighting for them. So we can feel very good at times when we say, oh, there's a human trafficking arrest. I always ask, who was the arrested? If you tell me it's the bottom girl, okay, but she's actually a victim, number one. The pimp, sure, put that guy away. Put him away for 30 years. What we are not seeing is the buyer, the demand side of the business. And if you think of business, any business, supply meets demand. So if there's demand, there'll be supply. So you have to, at some point, crack down heavily on demand, or you will not stop the crime. You are not seeing arrests in this country with the justified sentencing and the publicity on the demand side. Now, yes, people will say, well, y'all could Jeffrey Epstein. Sure, Epstein got a lot of attention, and his case got a lot of attention now, but they missed the guy in 2008 and gave him 11 more years to abuse children before they cracked down on him, and then he was going to be tried. If he did not allegedly commit suicide, he was going to be tried as a sex offender who has sex with children, where he should have been tried as a sex trafficker. He was a pimp, which is a higher sentence. It's a more strict sentence with different laws. So again, the district attorneys and some of the leadership in the judicial community take the buyer and they bump their sentence down to a misdemeanor sentence because it's a blot on society. It's a black eye to society. It's a black eye to a professional football team or a Fortune 500 company if one of their C-suite executives is involved in trafficking. But the pimp, who nobody knows, or the bottom girl, no, they'll throw the book at them. But there'll just be another pimp. You take a pimp, you get another one. We have to start cracking down and don't care about who you are. I don't care if you're the leader of a nation, royalty from England, a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, Democrat, Republican, Independent. If you abuse children, the book should be thrown at you, and they should sit for the actual sentence, what the law says, which should be 30-plus years, and make an example of these guys.
Speaking of laws, there's a fine line between being a child or not quite an adult at being 17 or 18, and then being older than 17 or 18, and then they are listed as prostitutes, which is into itself, I would say, an area of the law that really needs to be examined, because prostitution, while it's necessarily illegal, very few of the prostitutes are their stories aren't really being told. In other words, how they got to that status, but they probably got to that status as an adolescent, right, Jaco?
Very, very, very few of the prostitutes today are actually there because they want to be prostitutes and decided to do so after the age of 18. Very few. It is such a minuscule number, right? That normally they're trafficked at 16, 17, and now they turn 18 and the law changes all of a sudden. They go from you're the victim and you're protected to now you're the prostitute. How in the world? Yep. You're dealing with a human being. You can't ask that human being, hey, you're 18, so flip the switch. Hey, quickly heal emotionally, make good decisions, get control back over your life. The threats you're under all of a sudden disappear because you're 18. No, that's ridiculous to even consider it that way. But remember, only 4 years ago, the children in 48 of 50 states, only 4 years ago, the children were convicted as prostitutes. That's 14, 12. So that law changed, sure, but that delineation, now all of a sudden when you're 18, you're under a different law construct, it's ridiculous. And because even if that child will tell you at 22, right, no, I want to do this, and you ask, well, when did this start? Well, I was 15. No, you don't want to do this. This is what you've been trained to do. This is what you've now accepted as what you're good for. This is the only value you have, because you've been told you're good for nothing else. You've been told that you'll die and won't survive. You're either addicted to something, or you're in such a dragnet, in such a web, that you're fearing for your life. It's not a choice. No way is it a choice. I mean, when it's forced, how's it a choice? It's like having a gun against a bank teller's head and say, make a choice, empty the teller or I shoot you. And then they empty the teller. Is that a choice? It's not a choice. Survival.
There's a whole nother component, Jaco, and we're going to have you back, because I want to talk about rehab for these victims, of which is a whole nother component. And, you know, the movie 8 Days is a collection of real stories. And so their real stories speak to rehabilitation, because as you say, it plays on them that they have been told that they're worthless, that they have of no value, and today's going to be the best day of their life going forward. Would that be about right?
Yeah, look, you strip, and again, this is any human being. This is not hard to do, honestly. We all have vulnerabilities. When you strip a human being from self-worth and you create dependency, codependency, then it's done. This is no different than a woman that is abused, battered by a boyfriend, and she doesn't leave, and then and will sit in a police station and defend the guy. You go, well, she wants it. No, she doesn't want it. We are human beings with emotional and mental insecurities, and it's like a disability when that part of your brain is not activated to where you can actually take charge and take a holdback. So, yeah, there's massive coercion and manipulation and foul play involved. And how much more than with a child? You understand the average child trafficked in the U.S. is 12 years old. So that's not hard. To get a 12-year-old child completely twisted and messed up mentally and emotionally, that's not hard to do. Especially not if you understand what that child's vulnerabilities are. And again, this doesn't mean this is a runaway. These are children that stay at home and mom and dad is present. Mom and dad is home, but mom
oblivious.
And dad is not, but oblivious. And they fix things with money, right? So today, the affluent Caucasian community is a very easy target, because that girl or boy lives in a bubble with no radar. They're oblivious.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been speaking with Jaco Booyens. His movie is 8 Days. Please get this movie if you have any concern at all for what is happening right next door to you. High praise to you, Jaco. Thank you for all of this, and please come back. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure having you with us, and we'll see you again very soon on the Denise Simon Experience.